All right, call to order the Tuesday, November 12th, 2019 Park and Recreation Commission meeting. Janet, can you help us with the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Layless? Here. Commissioner Osborne?
Here.
Commissioner Itis? Here. Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Darlene?
Here.
Commissioner Strother?
Here.
Commissioner McCormick?
Here.
Commissioner Willett?
Here.
Okay, the first thing on the agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda for this week. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Agenda passes. Next is the approval of the meeting minutes from the October 7th Park and Recreation Commission meeting. Do I have is there any changes to the meeting minutes as listed in your packet? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes pass. All right, next on the agenda, community comment. Sparse crowd tonight, so I will leave the community comment section as is, and we can move on to the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. I believe, Scott, you are up with the city manager update.
Hello. There it is. Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Neal, and I'm the city manager here in Edina. And I am going to shed some light onto the dark art of capital budgeting and spending tonight, and how we do those two things in Edina. The first thing to note before we get started on that particular aspect of our budget is, what does Edina's general budget look like? In any given year, in the past 5 years, we'll spend somewhere between $115 and $125 million a year. This is the all-in number. So this is the money we spend on salaries, benefits, vehicles, IT equipment, capital projects, everything. So if you look at how that money is broken down, it's about 2/3 in what we call our governmental funds and about 1/3 in our enterprise funds. Our enterprise funds include all of our park enterprise funds, plus our liquor store operation and our utility operations. On the other, in that part of our budget is largely is funded by user funds, user fees, permits, liquor sales, etc. The other side of our budget is our governmental side, and this is really what you'd consider kind of the standard government kinds of projects, funded mostly by taxes, some kind of tax. Our general fund is the part of our operation where general operations of the city are funded. So our parks and recreation operations, our police department, fire department, public works, operations in city hall, etc. Debt service is the amount of money we spend every year to service our debt. So bonded bonds of all kinds of shapes and sizes. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Our construction fund, where we're doing capital improvements every year. And then a really large number of special revenue funds, the biggest of which is our Housing and Redevelopment Authority. So one of the things that we've been talking about for the past 5 years with our city council is our capital improvement program funding problem. And I think this little snippet of data illustrates the problem that we had. The problem was that our capital funding, our sources of capital funding, were really not, they weren't enough. They were unstable and they were unpredictable. And that's what you're seeing in this snippet. So general fund surplus means that we were dedicating any money that we had at the end of the budget year in our general fund unspent. It was called general fund surplus, and we put that into our capital funding for the upcoming year. And then we also dedicated $100,000 of our liquor profit would also go into that capital funding, or our CIP funding for the year. So in 2015, that number that we allocated for spending in the upcoming capital funding cycle was a little over $800,000. You can see by just the luck of the draw in 2016, that went to $64,000 as a general fund surplus plus 100 in the liquor, so 164,000. The year after that, instead of 64,000, is 1.8 million. So that number really bounces up a lot, bounces up and down a lot. So it wasn't dependable. So the problem with our capital funding in that time frame we recognized was we didn't have enough money, it was unstable, and it wasn't able to be predictable. The solution that we spent a lot of time on was to have more money available, stable sources of money, and predictable sources of money. And that's where the debt levy opportunity, the tax levy, and budget discipline comes in, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that.
Hey, Scott, just
Yes.
a question. I don't know if you want to do these now.
Sure.
Just curious, why was there that fluctuation in those 3 years?
Yeah, so it's hard to predict. Sometimes in the size of our budget, it could be that a capital project that was supposed to be spent in 2016 didn't actually get onto our books or get off of our books until 2017. So even fluctuations from that have an impact on that number. But for us, the issue was that it was hard to predict it, and that led to it being unstable. And that's why the solution we were looking for is what can we predict, what's stable, what if we levy for something that for a city government, a tax levy is the most stable, most predictable form of revenue that we have. And then of course the budget discipline was to, if we're going to go that course, to stay that course and to get everybody to buy into it. So one of the things I showed you just a second ago was something called debt levy opportunity. Debt levy opportunity means that when you're looking at this chart, and this is the amount of millions of dollars of total outstanding debt that the city has, you can see that it's beginning to tail off, right? It's going the right direction, at least in terms of paying off that debt. That's good news, because in that series of debt being paid off, there's an opportunity, and that opportunity is really not the entire bar that you see there, but just the green bar, because that's our levy debt.
Can I ask you a question on how that's calculated? Since we're going in the right direction, is more of we're projected to go in the right direction,
Yes.
since we are currently at 2019.
Yep.
Last I checked. So how is that calculated in terms of the projection of it going down?
So this is less a projection and more an actual, right? So this is an actual number of the amount of outstanding debt that will be still outstanding as we go forward into the future. Right, so we know what these numbers are, unless we borrow more.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying in the current state, if we continue paying off the way we're paying off today, this is how the number would go down.
That's right.
True? Okay.
Right. Of course, we probably won't do that, but this is the best that we can project into the future at this point. These are actual numbers.
Say more when you say we won't do that.
Because it will be difficult, I think, to not do additional borrowing between now and then. But I would tell you that most of that borrowing will impact what we see in the blue and not in the green. And I'm going to show you in a second why that's important. Why that's important, if you look at that blue line, at least at this scale, you can see it's going down, but it's hard to measure how much it's going down. And this is actually what happens in that the green bar part of that, is you can see in this line graph how it continues to go down. This is the amount of money that we levy every year as a property tax to pay down the debt for previous years' park bonds, city hall, gymnasium, fire station, public works, and Braemar Field. And what this is intended to show you is when those bond issues for those particular things get paid off. And when they get paid off, the city has the opportunity at that time to lower its property tax levy, or it can keep that property tax levy intact, leave it right where it is, and use the money that it would have levied every year for debt service in exchange to turn that into a CIP levy and use that money for capital improvements. And that's what we're proposing to do. Any questions about these issuances? Okay.
What was the gymnasium one?
The gymnasium is the gyms at Southview. That was a joint project with the school district. It's all right. So what I showed you initially were just those first 3 years, right, of 2015, 16, and 17. And now what I'm showing you is how we're going to increase that number every year from here on out with something called General Fund CIP Levy. So as that debt service levy, as the need for issuing that much of a debt service levy goes down, we're going to shift that into something called general fund CIP levy. And you can see how that number goes up every year to the point where in 2022, which is where we are in our budgeting cycle right now, there's $1 million that we project every year from general fund surplus, $100,000 from our liquor, and $2 million in CIP levy funding. So instead of having an unpredictable, unstable sources of revenue for CIP funding, we have something that we can depend on because it's a levy and a liquor profit, and we can project that into the future and be able to rely on it. This gives you just another look into what our other CIP sources are, CIP funding sources are. We have an HRA fund, utility storm fund, utility fund for water. So water, sewer, and storm all have their own individual CIPs, and those are paid for with utility payments. The next two are the CAS fund, the Conservation and Sustainability Fund, and the PACS fund, the Pedestrian and Cyclist Safety Fund. Those are funded by utility franchise fees on our gas and our electric bills. And the electric fund, and then there's additional smaller general fund that operates as well for CIP. So there's a couple different sources of CIP money that we can use to do projects.
I'm sorry, I want to ask you more questions.
Yes.
Actually, it's 2 slides back.
Sure.
On the liquor fund, so I know that we've seen some impacts with inputting in total wine and things in terms of the profits coming from the liquor store. Has that $100,000 changed over the time with that, the changes in the profitability, or is that sustained?
The number that we have dedicated from liquor profits into our CIP has not changed much over the past few years, and we're not projecting it to change much. But it's important to note that the first call on those profits are to cover the operating deficits of any of our park and rec enterprises. So if as long as we still have operating deficits in those enterprises, that's where those deficits are covered from. Okay. And if there's any money left in addition to that, we could put that into our CIP as well.
So it's not always 100,000. It's whatever's left over from that 100,000.
Yeah, and what we use as projections is the 100,000. But if it's more, it could be more.
Okay, thank you.
So that's why we care. I think that's one reason to talk about why we care about what the operating deficits are in the park and rec enterprises, because the less those operating deficits are, the more money we have to spend on capital improvements. So one example of an area that has grown as a source of capital funding for various projects around our city is the CAS fund, the Conservation and Sustainability Fund. That has changed since 2017 as the franchise fee has increased from 50 cents to 95 cents to $1.45, and you can see the impact that makes on the amount of revenue available. So the operating cost, it takes about $120,000 to operate that fund or operate that service within our city government. So the more money that we generate there, the more money that can be spent almost exclusively on capital improvements. And these are capital improvements that have some kind of sustainability benefit to them or conservation benefit to them for any city facility. So this is what our capital funding stream looks like, how it's changed, or how we're expecting it, how we have changed it, I'll say. Since 2013 to 2023. As you can see, the blue and the green are general fund surplus and liquor. And what we are modifying this to change to be tax levy, this red line into the future, again, is more stable, it's more predictable, and it's a better source of revenue for our capital improvements. Our city budget process works like this. In odd numbered years, so 2019, we work on a new two-year operating budget. So we are getting to the point where we've got a firm budget. It'll come to the council in December, and it will be our operating budget for 2020 and 2021. In even numbered years, so in 2020, we'll update the 5-year CIP. So in 2018, from a CIP standpoint, we produced a CIP for 2019 to 2023, a 5-year time period. And in 2020, we will do the 2021 to 2025 CIP. The formation process for that capital improvement plan looks like this. We do a lot of inventory and analysis during the first quarter of 2020. We'll do staff proposals, so staff will do some analysis and ranking of various projects, because there's always more projects than there is money available. In Q3, we'll do some engagement with council, commissions, and the community over how should we spend $3 or $4 or $5 million in capital improvements around the community. In Q4 is where we refine, recommend, and we ask council for an approval of that proposed CIP for that time period. And that's how we do capital budgeting here. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
So Scott, all the numbers that you had up there were entire city, right? They're not specific to the Parks and Recs
Right,
program,
right.
so it's the whole city.
So in that general pot, in that CIP, I showed you a number. Let's look at this. So 2021, we would expect to have somewhere near $3 million of new money available for capital improvements. That's something that the parks projects compete with police projects and fire projects and public building projects. They compete in that sort of open process for capital dollars. That's true.
So in your example, in 2021, there's $3 million total for the city to do everything that they have on their capital improvement list.
No.
Okay.
So there's a number of capital projects that don't compete for this money, and those are street projects, utility projects, sidewalk projects, most trail projects. They have other sources of capital money. If some project in our city has some other dedicated source of capital funding that can be spent on it, we almost always spend that money or redirect that project to that source of revenue, because these monies are not as great as they ought to be.
So is it fair to say then the other sources for street funding and such are enough to cover the CIPs in there?
Closer, yeah. I would say closer. They're maybe not entirely, but closer. So, but they're also restricted, right? So we cannot use money generated by our water utility fund, for example, the water bills that you pay. We can't use that money to do a park project somewhere.
Right.
And street special assessments are similar to that as well.
And so this $3 million, again, in this example, is what would be considered to be spent for unfunded CIP.
Right, that's true.
And is that how you guys build the CIP budget, kind of funded and unfunded?
Yes.
So to speak?
Yep, so there is a list, if you look in our CIP, there is a list of unfunded projects. They're by number, they're by department, and they're by amount and a project description. But you can see what made the cut and what didn't make the cut.
Okay.
That's ultimately approved by the city council late in the year, sometime around the end of the kind of early mid-December.
And do you know what that total number of unfunded projects is right now?
I don't. Perry,
For
do
the
you?
entire CIP or the parks section?
The entire CIP?
The entire CIP, I don't know.
I
think
either.
the 5-year window for parks was around 22 million.
Yeah.
I don't
the
know
number
the
50
entire
million
thing.
sticks in my mind for everything, but I don't know how to segment that down into just this group. We could know, it's knowable. That
Right.
number is easy to find. I just don't have it here.
So let's say it's 50 million. So each year we're able to chip out 2 to 3 million out of this $50 million bucket.
Plus the numbers that we add on to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So I have a quick
Yes.
question. When you showed the graph that showed as the different, this graph, yes,
Yep.
the debt services fall
Okay.
off, it looks like in 2017, we finished paying off the park bonds. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
And so I'm wondering, when you look at this and you sort of look at the different projects that fall off, and then you're looking at where you're redirecting those funds.
Right.
Is there any discussion about, we've sort of finished paying off the investment in the parks from the 90s? that we should be using some of those funds or a proportion of those funds for park projects ongoing?
You're asking if there's that discussion going on? Yes, there is that discussion going on, that there should be some connection, right? So you see how that debt service levy decreased from 2016 to 2017, and you can kind of see what happened here, right? From 2016 to 2017. 2017 was the first year that we took advantage of that and added a CIP levy into our capital funding stream. I'm sorry?
But that number you just referred to goes to everybody, not just to the parks.
Right.
Yeah.
It goes into a greater pool, a larger
We
pool.
have to fight for it. in that.
Right.
I have a question in terms, sorry, Julie, I didn't want to cut you off. I just want to ask, what I haven't heard you talk about, and I'm sorry that I was late, in terms of we've added additional staff to the city staff, I guess, or different positions, I should say. We've added additional positions over that time. How does that come into play? I know it was in your very first slide I walked in as you were going over that. Was that where that's shown?
Where does that come into play?
I think on your first graph, when I was just walking in this one here. So in terms of, is this where you're, like, how are we paying people to come into work every day? Like, where does that come into here?
On this list, almost every one of those, well, I shouldn't say that. Not the construction fund box and not the debt service box, but every one of those boxes, other than those two, have some element of personnel expense in them. Whether they're general fund or all the people that work for the water utility or the liquor stores or the various park enterprises. There's personnel costs that are sort of embedded in all of those. Mm-hmm. But your question is how does staffing?
We want to add an additional police officer. We want an additional person on the parks staff team. Yeah. Where does that come into play here? I
would say for the most part, not all of those, but for the most part, you'll see those show up in the level of that general fund surplus. So if we add staff, that has the potential, unless we levy taxes for it as well, to decrease that general fund surplus. And if we decrease that surplus, that decreases the amount of money that we can spend on capital improvements. So that kind of comes into this slide as well. So what you see us here budgeting for, you see us here identifying $1 million a year in 2018 and 19 and 20 and 21 and so on. Again, those numbers are just for budget projections. We think that our general fund surplus is going to be more than that. It was more than $1 million for 2018. It'll be more than $1 million for 2019 as well. And so anything over and above the $1 million is additional money that we didn't account for, but will be available for capital spending.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand. I know the city is different than corporate America, which I'm not involved in anymore, but back when I was, it's like a lot of it's like coming down to like, we have a debt, we have headcount. Do we need to reassess how many headcounts we are? We're adding more headcount than we are decreasing our debt and increasing our profits. So I'm just I like to understand what the vetting process is of, like, are we arm wrestling to figure out who's getting more people versus which projects are getting approved versus who gets a playground, and how does that actually work? So I get the whole pocket of here's how much money we all have and whoever's a better fighter gets it, but I just don't understand how that vetting process works, and are we looking at existing projects that we're funding or people that we're funding? And I'm not looking to cut someone's job. I'm just trying to understand it.
Well, there's absolutely a connection between operational staffing and the amount of money that's left for capital spending. What we have been trying to do, and what I think we have successfully got our council to acknowledge and approve, is to begin dedicating certain tax levy money that's outside of the operational costs, the personnel costs of the city for future capital improvements, trying to disconnect those kinds of decisions so that one doesn't necessarily have to obligate the other. And that's what you're seeing in this slide on the GF CIP levy side. The more that we've been able to grow in that section, that's money that is not available for new operating costs, because it's been kind of segregated to get away from that stream.
Anything else? Go ahead, Bryn.
Maybe I just missed it in the PowerPoint specifically, but like, is there a specific emergency or immediate CIP fund? Like, I know, for example, the heaters at Braemar, like, broke this past few weeks. So where does that money come out of in the budget if you need immediate
Sure.
repairs on something or specific?
That's a great question, because there's more money that's available for CIP spending than in 2021, for example, than $1 million, than $3 million or close to that. Because there's a balance in the CIP fund as well. So some years we spend more than we take in, some years we spend less than we take in, but that money continues to be held in our CIP fund. So there could be anywhere from $3 to $5 million in balance that we use, and that's where an emergency fund would be paid from. Emergency expenditure.
And Bryn, there's also a little bit of nuance between a park enterprise, which Braemar is, versus a general one. So like the enterprise funds will carry their restricted or unrestricted cash balance. And depending on if they're cash positive or not, that could come out of there first. And then again, it gets back to how does it affect that cost recovery, which Scott had talked about earlier, which balances out with those liquor store profits in the end.
So Scott, just a question on that one chart that you had where you showed how the debt levy component drives down.
That one?
Right. So, so at the end of the day, in 2035, there will be $5 million generated from this that would go back into the capital.
There could be.
That would be that's how it looks like it would
Yep.
work right now.
There could be, unless there's some additional borrowing that happens during that time period. So if we were to do a Parks and Rec referendum and do a big bond issue for parks projects, that would disturb this chart, and it would not zero out at 2035. It would zero out sometime in the future.
Okay,
that's not
right.
saying that's a bad idea. I'm just saying that has an impact on the amount of cash that we're able to generate for our CAP.
Okay. So if you went out for more debt, you would start to use this to help
Yes.
pay that down. Okay.
Yep.
I said a last question, I think. Was there ever a dedicated fund for parks? And maybe I'm oversimplifying city government, but how hard would it be if there hasn't? How hard would it be to have something that was dedicated to the parks? Because kind of piggybacking off Eileen's question, it feels like, in the past we've used a bond or a debt, ask in the past, and as you said, it might be a good idea in the future to do it again, but that seems the only way that we ever get dedicated funds when we have, and I think we've talked about this before, playgrounds that need to be updated and other, parks that need to be updated and those types of things. So has there ever been one? And if there hasn't, would we ever be able to do it?
So you're asking for whether there's been a dedicated capital?
Yeah, so like
for
use the
park capital
CIS thing that
improvements?
you talked about, or the water fund that's for those types of
yeah.
things. So has there ever been something like that that's been just dedicated to parks? And if not, how hard would it be? Because I think based off of what Mike was saying too, we get lumped into this unfunded, and we're trying to, as a group, I think collectively, we see kind of the same stuff come over on our work plan and the things that we're passionate about as a group. It's if we had dedicated funds, then it really wasn't, we wouldn't be in that kind of, Perry and staff wouldn't be in that kind of octagon, so to speak, to try to get those funds for things. And so it's just more curious.
Okay, so the first answer I'd say, I don't think so. But I don't know. I don't recall that. I've not seen any evidence of that there's been a dedicated park capital fund in the past. How hard would it be? It wouldn't be that hard. So I think it was in 2015, maybe 14, when we established these utility franchise fees. That was a revenue source that was available to the city. The city had never used it before. There was a discussion about if we're going to impose these utility fees, utility franchise fees, what should we spend them on? And the decision at that time was, let's not just lump that money into the general fund. Let's use it for something very specific so we can point to it and say that was funded with that money. And so that's where the PAX fund came from. And a couple of years later, that's where the CAS fund came from. Two potential revenue sources that are out there and are kind of at that same stage. One is the local option sales tax, which we are discussing with the council right now about what could be done with that. And another might be the Convention and Visitors Bureau, or a lodging tax. Our colleagues in Plymouth last year were successful in getting state statute changed to allow them to use some or all of their lodging tax on park capital improvements. They're the only city in the state that has that authority. But now that it's been granted, that might be something that we could discuss doing here too.
Okay, just one follow-up question to your question. Do you know, other than Plymouth, are any of the sort of first-ring or second-ring suburbs, do they have a dedicated fund like we're talking about? Do we know, I mean, you might not know that off the top of your head.
I don't know that.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
I think Perry is up next. We'll give him a second, or if he's going to do it from his seat there. And he's going to walk us through the proposed Parks and Rec fees for 2020.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to thank Scott for coming tonight and giving that update. I think that was on the commission's mind. I'm sure it'll generate questions. The other piece, since the PowerPoint was created, we'll get that attached to the packet at the end of the meeting and then send that out to the commission too. I'm sure seeing it a second time may generate some additional questions for you. But this evening, one of your action items is to review our staff proposed fees and charges for 2020. Ultimately, this evening, we'll look for a recommendation that we can take to the City Council on establishing those. In your packet, I won't go line by line or anything like that. You can generate some of the questions you might have, but there's a little bit of a background on just our fee philosophy that we utilize here for those programs, and it kind of comes down to three basic programs types or classifications. Those are essential, important, and value added. And we kind of went through a bunch of different options there for public interest, financial sustainability, any of the benefit that they have to the community, is there competition in the marketplace, and what type of access does that mean? And then we gave a couple of examples of what kind of those programs are that fall into those. You know, some of those essential programs, when you think the playground program, that's not one that we can generate a lot of revenue for, but it is a very valuable program to the youth in the community and to the families to be able to have those programs provided. Some of those important programs, when you think of beginner instruction, a lot of those are skill development. Some are even accessible swim lessons, et cetera. There is kind of a little bit more of a fee to that, but they may not cover all their cost. And then we get to the end, kind of those value-added programs. That's really a choice that our residents make to sign up for some of our programs. There may be additional competition in the marketplace. Those are things like our leagues, a lot of the enterprise participation, that's buying an hour of ice at the arena, that's going to play golf, that's going to Edinburgh Park and paying for that admission in there. So kind of those three program, levels or elements as we kind of go forward. We kind of talked a little bit in the report about factors that are impacting our costs this year. Looking forward for the next year, I would say, recruiting a lot of our seasonal staff. We hire hundreds of staff every year. We need to find roughly 85 lifeguards just at the aquatic center alone. We kind of look at, we almost base our season off of availability. So it's not just recruiting that. In addition, it's retention of those lifeguards. I always point to the aquatic center because it's maybe one of the enterprises that's most impacted by long-term retention. We don't want to operate the aquatic center on first-year lifeguards every year, 100%. We kind of like to, if we can break that into thirds, that's great for us. A third first year, a third second year, and if we really want to keep a third around for that third and final year, that kind of gets them in that point where they're making internship decisions in college, maybe sticking around and maybe a coordinator position after that. But for the kind of the safety and the experience at that is we want to kind of have those return employees for that kind of cycle. The same thing is said for the enterprise facilities as well. The more people we can get back and retain them, the better off our experience is. A little bit less of a first year factor, a little less training. What that also means is sometimes, that pay scale differentiate a little bit. We are kind of limited in that sense. The other kind of cost piece we are running up against is just conducting preventative maintenance. I think if any of you have done any home improvement projects or projects at your work, you're knowing the trades are extremely busy. Our general managers are spending a lot of time building relationships. A lot of those are specialty vendors. Not everyone can work on a cooling tower, right, Chad? Not everyone can, work in the catering area of the golf course or on a kiln at the Arts Center. So they spend a lot of time building those relationships with those vendors, and that's a very busy trade sector with a lot of competition in it. So that is also driving a little bit of our costs. Also this year, our enterprise funds, you may have heard it in the past, but we are going to use a management cost recovery calculation. And we kind of say that's a lot of the stuff above the line, right? That's the factors that they can control as general managers, their revenues, their expenses. It's not going to include how they'll look at that as far as their debt service or their depreciation, things like that are going maybe back within the facility or an investment that was made. So when you kind of see those numbers this year, those are kind of that cost recovery expectation that they're going to bring in. So that kind of correlates a little bit to what we're projecting for a revenue. You can kind of do a takeoff and see what that expense side of things as well. Also in the report, we kind of just ran through a little bit of facility by facility and just kind of give you a little bit of a picture of what kind of level of anticipated revenue each one is going to have going forward, and then a little bit of just a quick summary on what the fee changes might be in those areas, and then just where those revenue sources are. It's a little bit interesting to see, how much concessions impacts the budget at the aquatic center. We want to try to get a lot of season passes there. That's good for us. It's a solid income stream. We hope people then keep coming back. This year we had one of the highest visits per season pass years we've had. So a lot of people that bought season passes went a lot, and that's a good thing. When we looked at rain days, and I think Joe can attest, they were every Tuesday. For the Tuesday League was impacted, and Tuesdays at the Aquatic Center. Those are impacts to us on that day-to-day piece, like concessions. When it's gloomy and it's raining, we're not selling a lot of things. So that kind of tailors there. And then the general managers have to kind of make decisions at their sites. What is our staffing level that day? What are our service levels? Are we completely closed? It seemed like this year people made their mind up early. They watched the forecast and said, I'm taking that at 100% and I'm changing my plans. And, we had really bad forecasts that turned out to be great, and we kind of had some low attendance. And then there's days where, we had a forecast where it was just going to be beautiful, and even though it rained, people still came. So I think people were making their decisions based off of those weather decisions this year. So we kind of went through each of those kind of facility areas and highlighted what some of those expectations and changes are in the report. Kind of the last piece of that is just the general park and recreation budget itself, so the non-enterprise pieces. And that's what you see from a lot of the lesson registration, adult fees for activities and leagues, as well as things like our picnic shelter reservations. One thing I just wanted to draw your attention to in the report is we're asking you for the picnic shelter reservations to approve those at last year's rate. However, we're right now looking at moving that from a very paper process where you need to phone in and reserve to going with an online reservation. So we'll be developing that system out a little bit better, and then if we decide to change or if that has an impact, we'll come back and look at what those fees are. But I just want to draw your attention to that may be a discussion point in the future, because our goal is to get those online. We think looking at the availability, if you want to do it at night when you've kind of made a decision, you want to have a reservation or book a shelter, you can do that. I think people expect that of us, so we want to move to that sense. What that means from the window of time that will allow for a reservation, so we can ensure that we can have a transition period to clean the facility, get it set up for the next reservation. Those are the types of things we're working out right now, but I just wanted to make sure I drew your attention to that fact that might change in the future, and we're just not quite sure of that at this point in time. So. Also in the attachment, we had highlighted all of our proposed fees and charges. I was very proud of the staff this year. They really tried to ensure that they didn't move fees up if they weren't feeling that was an essential piece of where their enterprise operation was or where that program was headed. So a lot of it was specialty instructors, the cost of doing business, et cetera, of what we need to kind of generate within those windows. So you're not seeing a lot of changes wholesale across the board in here. It's just in kind of some unique sectors as well. So with that, we'll stand for any questions that you might have on the fees and charges this year. We are looking for an action from you to take to the City Council. And just to make sure you know that Chad Eichens, the Braemar Arena and Sports Field General Manager, is here this evening, as well as Joe Aboud, the Braemar Golf and Golf Dome Manager, is here as well, which the Golf Dome with the Top Tracer technology is a tremendous hit the first several weeks here. So very proud of that investment by Joe and staff. So with that, if anyone has any questions, we can work through that.
I have a quick question about the aquatic center. I understand you want to drive people generally to the season pass because then they're bought in at the beginning of the year, even if we have a terrible summer. And so can you talk a little bit about the thinking to increase the season pass costs, but not the daily costs? And I believe last time, and I didn't pull up my notes, we increased the season pass cost as well. And so I understand that it sounds like there was good use of the season pass by the season pass holders, but just talk a little bit, if we want more people to be buying season passes, why we're increasing that and not the daily rates.
I think it's a little bit of two things. One, it is, like you had said, we want to ensure that we get people bought in for the season, and the best way to do that is a season pass. In speaking with Patty, the last several years, they were much higher increases. So I think they were all the way up in the 15% annually range a couple of years ago to 10%. So this year it's a smaller amount of 15 or 5%, which equates to just $3 or $4. By not increasing the daily fee admission, we're kind of still driving that value added, right? So those are kind of your non-resident that's kind of maybe trying us out for the first time. That's where we kind of invest in some of our marketing to get people to draw in from other areas to say, we have a more unique experience here than, say, the Richfield pool. So that's where we kind of look at our competition in the market to say, we're a little nervous of raising that daily fee. Because then is that going to preclude us from people that are just kind of shopping around for an experience to say, you know what, for another $3, I'm not interested in the flow rider, I'm going to stay at my place. But if we can kind of capture that, we still think that the annual pass is a very good deal for our residents at that price. When you look at kind of the total cost of it is spread out over the season, of what that is per visit. If you know, it kind of pays for itself after, I think, 6 or 7 visits. I think, or is that the non-resident? 7 or 8. Yeah, 7 or 8 visits, you know, throughout the course of the June, July, and August. You know, we still think if we can get you at that 7 or 8 or more visits, that's the positive thing. You know, we did have one youth this summer that had a perfect attendance. The staff gave him a plaque. That family had a really good per visit rate at the end of the year. He came every day, and I think it was a challenge for him. But so that's kind of the piece of it is, you know, value capture and make sure people have that experience. But then where is that daily market so we don't kind of price ourselves out of that unique visitor that we want to kind of get in.
Yeah, and looking at it, it does say that for the early bird rate, the break even for residents is 7 or 6 visits if you add an additional member. And then at the high end for the non-residents who purchase after April 30th, the break even is 10 visits. And I would like psychologically, that rate of $96 is getting close to the $100 mark, which I think it's worth tracking to see if we see more people, especially after summer that was pretty rough for weekend swimming anyway. I was a season pass holder. It would be something worth tracking to see if it's driving more people to the individual pass piece.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And do we know how that compares to other, like you said, the Richfield pool or at St. Louis Park, like with their season pass? And then I'm sure you can tell how many times the season pass holders go, right?
Correct.
And do we see that on average they're going 8-9 times?
Yeah, we actually saw that number increase tremendously this year. I don't have that stat exactly, but this was our top year of the number of visits per pass. So people that bought passes were coming a lot. So that tells us that we're still in that really good value deal. So we're still an attractive piece for them. And as we know, weather can change anything.
For sure. I'm curious about a couple of things. One, and this goes maybe for the player card, the aquatic pass, maybe Centennial Lakes. Have we ever looked at half-season passes? And I asked that knowing that, say, the aquatic center is open for Memorial. Well, what is it? End of school till the August 18th-ish, something like that. So it's kind of a short window, and active families, I think most of us here are in that group. You know, kids' activities take up a lot of June and then into July, but then after that, then that's when really like the pool is an option for us because the kids don't have as much stuff going on. So I'm just curious to see if there's a way to, you literally just split it in half, right? So if it's 12 weeks long for the thing, it's the 6-week mark. Could you do a half of a season aquatic center pass for half rate or something like that? So people aren't investing for those things where they're not using it a lot. And maybe the answer is no, because we're seeing the usage, but just to be curious. And I thought of that as a player card too, not that we're trying to increase rounds, but is there an opportunity when golf is a set amount of time really here, we try to stay open, but do we have an opportunity to, I'm just trying to think of other creative ways to get people into that membership and see the value of things like that.
To my knowledge, we haven't looked at that specifically for the aquatic center, but I know this was the first season with the opening of the golf course that they did prorate the player's card. So a little bit different than what you're talking about because of the way the season's shaped. One thing I think staff had discussed in the past, but it didn't quite work out with our financial software or anything like that, was the ability to share like what you could almost call as like gift cards between facilities. Because of the way our financial software is structured and the way our enterprise are structured, we don't have the ability to say you bought something here and could you use it there. So I think from a greater standpoint is, do you have flexibility throughout all the facilities? And right now we're kind of at a point where we can't structurally do that from our financial software. We can maybe look at that for next year of that season pass. I'm sure there's pros and cons for each, but I'd really like to put that to staff to try to vet out to say, what would that look like for your facility? Do you think people would maybe not buy the season pass at all? Or would we get more half season passes at the aquatic center? I think that maybe be a grander decision to take back for the future to look at.
Yeah, I'm just curious. And if you didn't market it until instead of at the beginning of the season, then, so you're getting the same amount of visits and stuff. The other thing I'm just curious about, and it's kind of a little bit higher level, you talked about St. Louis Park and Richfield and some of these other communities that have pools. And I'm assuming that even though it says coming in 2019, and I don't know if maybe it is open, but that Lifetime facility at Southdale is literally in the shadow of the aquatic center. Have we anticipated, are we going to watch very closely to see maybe some correlation or impact of what that might have to families that are in the community that are like, well, we belong to Lifetime and we're just going to go to that pool. We're not going to double dip and have an aquatic center pass.
Absolutely, Chair. We're watching that as well as the planning in Bloomington. Not only are they having the water park project at the Mall of America, but the city of Bloomington itself is planning a community center and outdoor water park. So, what does that do from a marketing strategy standpoint or just a saturation of the market? We still think that the aquatic center itself has a lot of unique amenities that you can't find anywhere else. And I think that is a little bit of the beauty of the different cities around. Richfield has, maybe more lap swim that's available per day. However, we have flow rider and the tube rides. Even where I came from in Minnetonka, Shady Oak Beach could be considered a competitor. It was an outdoor area, but, they went with inflatables on their pond, on the lake, as well as a high deep water dock. So what are people offering, and are we still unique that we can kind of market that experience? The other piece of that is we're still strong on group visits. So when we look at that, it's, as a source of revenue, it's not just our season passes. We're also looking at those groups and how do they come, and that's also a fine balance. How many can you get in per day as a capacity standpoint, so we still have a good experience for the season pass holders. So I think we kind of factor that all in, and it's going to be interesting to watch to see how that impacts. Will people want to go to that center? I still think it'll be interesting to watch how that develops and how the new Lifetime is used in town, and what that'll do to a lot of things. I know we've talked with staff as well. We just kind of want to get in and see a tour of it, at first, right? There's 3 indoor soccer fields, right? I know that's not a lot of impact on maybe the sports dome, But, what are they doing from program sense that we can kind of watch and see how are we offsetting? What does that mean for our future plans, just based around what they're offering? So it is a little bit of a different price point than we are. So hopefully we can kind of stay in that sense where we're still a really good value for our residents. And that's kind of the key. You're talking, what a season pass is here for the 3 months is not even a monthly membership for a single at a lifetime. So, it's a little bit of a different comparison, but still will affect our market.
Yeah, and your answer then leads me to my last question, which is, we do this every year. We've done this every year. We kind of see these fees as a commission and we kind of go through them, and this is really great. How nimble are you allowed to be if you were to want it? Let's say it's June and you see a drop off and you can make some correlation to lifetime, or there's an amenity that you didn't plan for at a neighboring pool. We'll just use the aquatic center as the example. How nimble are you allowed to be to say we have to change our fee structure at that time? Is this process a one and done every year annually, or does the city council and the city allow you to say, we're going to do something, we're going to market it, and we're going to change?
We probably aren't as nimble as, say, Lifetime or any other non-municipal sector would be, because kind of the checks and balances that we have to ensure we go through. We can be slightly nimble, and that's kind of a gray area. And I'll give a good example is this year when the top tracer technology was brought up at the Golf Dome. We went before the city council. We kind of previewed it. We didn't know what our fees were going to be, but we did take to the city council a revised resolution on our fees. So that really was able us to just, maybe it was like a 2-week window. So I think if we're monitoring that halfway through the season and we decide at any of our facilities we need to be a little bit more nimble, it's a fairly short process for us to get in front of the city council and get a resolution adopted to change those fees. We've kind of also built in a couple of varies. We've kind of seen that some of these aren't a one-size-fits-all anymore, and you may see that on kind of some of the unique specialty stuff. We're going to pay a little bit more attention to that, like commercial use of our parks. It used to be just a small fee, but, we had one where people wanted to film in a park, and, the fee we could have charged, wouldn't even have covered our costs to go there and open the gate for them. It was at the Fred Richards site. It went from, they wanted to use it for that fee, but they wanted it over 4 days. So we kind of built in some varies, so it gives staff a little bit more flexibility to say, here's what we think that true cost is. Doesn't quite work that way on passes and fees and leagues, but, we can go to the council. And as I said, that was one of the more recent examples that I've been a part of. I think from commission to council was about 2 weeks to change those rates. And then, those were established before opening.
Yeah, what local competition was used in establishing the golf rates?
Can I put Joe Abuda on the spot for that one? He came all this way.
Wouldn't want him to go home early.
Get his money's worth.
Good evening, Joe Booth, General Manager of the golf course. Question is, what competition do we choose?
Yeah, who did you look at, Joe?
The competitive set, we did a survey of about 36 golf courses in the local area to come up with our fee that we would like to use for the coming year. The ones we use mostly right now, we're looking at Chaska as competition, Bunker Hills, Edinburgh, USA, and Keller for municipal type golf courses. And public golf courses, we're looking at Rush Creek and Stonebrook as comparables for us.
So we're still substantially below those people.
We
for the most
are
part.
getting closer to the Edinburghs and the
Right.
Bunker Hills, but we're
Right.
a far way away from the Chaskas and the Rush Creeks.
Yeah. Just a comment at $34, I appreciate it because my wife and I can still play our 200 rounds a year there. Fits our budget.
No volume discounts.
No volume discount.
You should get a plaque.
Joe, a question on the golf dome. I'm sorry if you're done.
Yeah.
I see there's fees for buckets and time.
Yes.
So can you explain?
So Monday through Thursday, we are on bucket golf, meaning they will come in and buy an individual bucket, and they can hit those particular balls. On Friday through Sunday, we are at Time Golf, and it's unlimited based on half-hour increments that you can purchase.
Okay, but you're not mixing it?
At this time, we did keep the bucket golf during the week because we do have a large clientele that will use that. It's probably not the best way of doing things financially, but it's more of an amenity to our residents and our customers that we have. Financially, we definitely make more money when we are in Time Golf. But we do have constituents that utilize that during the week, and they want to keep the rates at a certain level.
Can you do, up till 5 o'clock buckets, then after that time, or
The
vice versa?
turnover process will not allow us to do that. So it takes about an hour or so to get all the golf balls out of the machines and on into the individual bays. So it's a little difficult to do midstream.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else?
We're looking for a motion.
I think we're looking for a motion on the proposed fees that are in your packet.
So,
For 2020.
yeah, before we do a motion, I would just note to that point about I'm piggyback off of it. I don't have a question for you. But the point about comparison and neighbors, I looked at Richfield's rates for their pool this past year, so they might change them. But the resident was $60, non-resident was $70, and they do have a half year or a half season pass. And so I worry that if the discussion with golf was we're behind some of our neighboring facilities, it seems like we're getting further and further ahead of at least one of our main competitors here. So I generally support the fee recommendations, but I do have some concerns about the direction we're going with the pool, just because we are, at least right now, it looks like we're getting, sort of a meaningful difference for our family budget about whether they pick Richfield or the Edina pool, and with all the additional competition we're going to have potentially on sort of the high end of things with new facilities coming out in neighbors. So I'd encourage watching that pretty closely, because it feels like we keep on moving that piece higher and higher.
And I do agree with you on that. We actually end up doing the pay by time because we don't end up going enough. And then at that rate, we're like, sorry guys, but why don't we just try out, instead of going to 6 times, let's just go to 6 different ones, which actually in the end was more fun because we got to experience different places. And I can tell you, because I've gone to every one of the public pools and all the equipment's within a 45-minute area of here, I can tell you that our price daily is not the best, and our facility may not be either. But I think that I wouldn't pay that for a yearly fee, even if I went every day, because I just think it's something we should check out. I think looking at Richfield, looking at St. Louis Park, looking at Apple Valley, looking at Egan, there's a lot of them around you can compare them to. Bunker Hill may be the only one, but that's really a haul. So I would agree with you on that.
And I just want to say something too. I think this half year is a really good idea, because it is really busy when the kids get older. And at that point, you're not going to spend $100 for them to go, or you'll do exactly what you do and just try out different pools. And it looks like, from what you showed me, they're able to do that half year at a pretty decent price. I mean, they don't just take the fee and just half it. They actually up it, so it could be an advantage for us. I just think they should look at it and take that recommendation back.
Yeah, we'll definitely look at that. I think we'll also try to look at, too, to see how much of those municipalities also support those fees. Are they running at a 25% cost recovery or a 50%? Because that may also impact, how we look at things as well. So, we might not all be playing by the same rules, but we're comparing the same season. So. And the same people. Mm-hmm.
I do understand that it is incredibly expensive to run the pool and the pool facility, and we want quality lifeguards, and we want to be retaining great staff, and we have great staff, and I think it's a great facility. My concern is just, are we getting to the place where the price point is going to be so high that people start looking elsewhere? And with the additional options we've identified that are going to be coming up in neighboring communities, my concern is, are we going to end up subsidizing more because we're getting fewer people who buy these passes? And if you have bad weather, then you're counting on the daily passes more, and it's becoming more and more unpredictable whether or not you want to show up for swimming.
So do we have anybody else?
So here's a question, Perry. Can we make a motion to approve, but suggest we look at adding some options versus just approving what we see and we've asked questions on? Do we have that option?
Well, from a commission, you would make the motion.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not going to rock your boat by having, I don't want to make I can make the motion, but I want to make sure I'm making the motion so that it's not going to hold up like, oh my gosh, we can't meet with the commission, because I think it's more of I make the motion that we approve them as they are, making the suggestion of adding a half year at the least to the aquatic center. I would also suggest that we just look at the price, because from a customer standpoint, they don't really know or care what you're getting, what you're comparing. In their eyes, you are apples to apples to Richfield, and the subsidies, they aren't going to know. And I wouldn't either if I was a patron. So I think that my motion would be to approve them as they are, with the caveat that we revise or look at adding to the aquatic center a half-year plan.
Well, I don't know if you made the motion or if you're still asking me a question.
I was trying to make the motion after I asked you the question, but if I didn't, I can go ahead and redo it again.
We're down to Robert's Rules of Orders here, but if you're still asking staff a question, I would recommend you approve them and then separately direct staff to review what are the advantages and concerns with operating at a half season pass at the aquatic center, which then we could bring back to you. We could take the time to look at it and then bring it back. The nice thing about the aquatic center is we do have a little bit of time, but we'd want to be a little bit nimble because we're going to start publishing, right? We've got brochure deadlines coming up, so yeah, because we're running up on a brochure deadline, so we'd like to get something in, and then if it's something where we need to if there is an advantage to doing it, that would put on us to market that, heading into the summer, that there are additional advantages. But, we're at this kind of time frame because we need to publish a brochure coming up here in 5 weeks or so.
Yeah. So I think I didn't say the motion, so I will just say it because.
Yeah, I think there's a motion, there's a directive, and then there's an amendment potentially in the future if they decide.
So my motion originally had said was that I suggest that we approve the paper as it is today, with the caveat that we should look at additionally adding a half year, as well as are we in the right price point compared to our competitive landscape. So that was what my motion was. So you could amend, but that's how I restated it.
I would second that motion.
Just a staff comment on the motion. We'll be going to print then with the rates that the council approves, and then we'll bring back a discussion on what a half-season pass looks like. That probably won't be in our brochure, but then we will have to mark it if we are successful with that.
And so if we're still in the discussion of the motion, I would say that the next step is the council has to approve it. And so I think between now and when the council approves it, it would be helpful if we could even have some of that preliminary information for the council about what the neighboring rates are, so that they can see that and know that it was at least a concern. Not that, and I guess I would say not that we don't think that the rates reflect maybe the full value of a season pass, but are we so out of sync with some of our neighbors? And again, I only just pulled up Richfield, that we might ultimately be hurting ourselves by raising it that high and by not providing the benefit of a half-season pass. So I think I second the motion, but I think it would be helpful to have council have that in front of them so that if they're the ones ultimately who get to make the decision and they're asking for a recommendation. And I guess the reason why I support the motion is because my recommendation would be that they should approve them, but they should really consider hard that additional information that we don't have in front of us here before they approve the aquatic center piece.
All right, so I will restate it the best I can, okay? Yeah. So the motion that's in front of us right now is to approve the fees as in our packet currently with the increases and/or fees that are keeping the same as proposed by staff for 2020. I think the directive is to staff is to look and research the idea of adding half year and/or making sure that our daily fees for particularly the aquatic center are in line and competitive with the neighboring communities, and adding a half year and having that information ready for city council for discussion with city council. And then if we need to approve those at a later date for marketing that wouldn't be in printed materials, we can do that at the December meeting. Fair? Is that fair?
Just want to clarify, I heard that
You said daily, but we were talking about the.
I'm sorry, the half day and the
Season.
half season.
half season, and then also to Julie's point, to look at some of the daily rates to make sure that those are aligned.
The neighboring,
It's a pass.
the neighboring
It's-
city rates
Yes.
would be part of your recommendation to the council.
Yep.
Yes.
Staff would gather neighboring city rates.
Yep, and provide that information.
At the daily
Yes.
as well as the
Yes.
season pass.
Yep. But not the option for a half season pass.
No, that option, we want that evaluated.
Coming back.
Yes.
But not to the council.
Not to the council. I think you should have that information at the ready to talk to the council.
I think that it has to be at least,
I would say all of the information that we would like to see back should go to the council as well.
otherwise they won't know about it.
Yeah, good.
They may approve it as, they've taken the recommendation, if they've seen this, that we would like to see it. If you could give them that information, they could approve it as well. That would be awesome. If not, then we could reprint it and blast it out in August. But I think that half season is something that we should give them, hey, here's what the other people have for daily, what they have for seasonal. And some of them have a half yearly. We would think that might be an option too. You know, I think that they would have the support of us if they had that option on here. We don't have that option, but if we could get that in front of them, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. I just want to clarify again, our
Yeah.
only concern with staff is timing with our brochure deadline and the council approval coming up in 2 weeks. So
I know, but I think that's what we're saying is we want to have it for the council to approve for the deadline, not to bring it back to us before that.
okay.
Second.
That's a good clarification. Can't second your own. Did the chair
I
make the
didn't
motion
hear-
or did you make the
He
motion?
rephrased it, so I was just helping.
Okay. Okay.
All in favor?
We got a couple motions in a couple seconds, so.
Yeah.
Do you need, for the record-keeping purposes, do you need us to move and second the restated motion, or are you comfortable with the Corn's motion as restated? Like, do you want us to do it again?
I think we should have Corin state it, Julie, if you want to second it, and then we can go from there. But we'll
Okay.
try
I'll
and be,
just
I'm
want
so
to
sorry.
clarify what Janet.
Take it out of-
maybe- Does Janet have? Oh no.
yeah. Yeah, I think just for record-keeping perspective, we need to
I
have a
will
clear
say it
motion.
again.
Yep.
This is fun. I move that we approve the fees as stated in the packet with providing the additional information to the council on the daily and seasonal rates of our peers in competition, as well as information on a part season pass for what we could do and what others do. If they see the information as helpful, they could approve it to all be included with your printing and publication, because we all feel like it is a good idea to have that there. That is my motion.
Do I have a second on the motion?
I will second that motion.
All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is passed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe and Chad, for coming tonight.
All right. Next on the report's recommendation is park assignments. In your packet, you should have seen I guess it's a spreadsheet. Looks like some people have reached out to either Greg or Perry and volunteered to cover some of the parks. I think this goes back to the conversation from the October 7th meeting, which was each of us having a group of parks that we go to, and I guess, are responsible for, and looking for improvements or things that are out of place or things that look really good, or just how kids are using those or other adults are using those spaces. I don't know if we want to go through each of these right now and everyone raise their hand, or if we want to just take this back, unless it has to be done here, and we just, in that coming week, just go volunteer for a couple and send them to you via email.
Yeah, I think this is also providing that update. You know, we've gotten a few emails in about what people are interested in. You know, Commissioner Miller emailed today. He was also interested in Bredesen, Lewis, and McGuire. Brenda, you had volunteered for a few, but then we realized what have you got? 3 more meetings? 3 more meetings, maybe? So, you know, how do we want to handle that? You know, we've put an asterisk by Brenda's name, maybe. I don't know if we're going to get out a lot in the winter here, but, you know, it's up to you if you wanted to go through and say, you know, these are the ones you wanted, or if you wanted to email Janet and I and say, here are the ones we can come back for December, and just say, okay, we've got everybody's in. You know, it'd be good to get those emails in, you know, maybe a week before the next December park board or park commission meeting, so we can get everybody down and then kind of get this established heading into the new year. But this is kind of the list we had and those that emailed us first. So
My only question is how do you handle, what if hypothetically everybody picked Pamela Park? So how do we handle the back and forth?
I think we'd bring that back. You'd see it on the list. We'll just put down whatever people want, and then, you know, we could flip coins. We could draw high, low. You could all decide, you know what, I'm good with those 2 or these 3. This, you know, that seems to be one that I'm really passionate about. You can maybe, you know, work that out amongst yourselves, if, or else we could try some very interesting tiebreakers if you wanted.
Well, I'm just thinking of efficiency-wise, to get it done without going through every single 40 of them tonight and saying me.
Yeah, I
But
think.
is there I mean, can we do a living document? And
Yeah, I don't know if we can, just because of the public, open meeting law. So I don't know if we can. We can email Perry. I think if we just put some guardrails around it, have it before the December 10th meeting. So that is December 3rd, a week before. And I guess for those, haven't sent an email, maybe look at, you know, a neighborhood park close to you, maybe one of the enterprise facilities, a couple other parks maybe you're not familiar with. Start with 4 or 5 and, you know, come back in December and see what's still open, and we'll just go from there. And if we find that there's, to Mike's point, if there's like a Pamela or a Bredesen or something like that, some of those might necessitate 1 or 2 folks just because of the size. But if we get into one of those things, then we can maybe at the December 10th meeting, if there's conflict, by conflict I mean more than enough people, we just...
You can opt out.
Yeah, we can opt out or try to find something different.
can I make a suggestion that, because the first time I saw the list was when the packet came out. So can, like, every Friday, just email everybody and say, this is the latest, so that we don't crawl all over each other. Like, somebody can look at it on a Friday and go, I haven't done this yet. Here's what's left, or here's what, so I can put my name in here where it's.
Or is there a way you can email it to Greg and Greg can email it to the group?
I would caution against, I think staff can share the information with
Okay.
you. That is not a violation of open meeting law.
Okay.
What I just want to caution you about is any reply to all
Right.
could be considered that.
Sure.
So, that'll be the tough part. Or we could do this whenever you email in, I could update the sheet and then send a new one. Say, hey, we've got an updated one. Those might be a little bit more sporadic. I can try to remember to do it every Friday. We can do it every Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there's double on there, we can take it offline. Like Rick and I had 2, so we decided which one's he's gonna take what I'm gonna do. So I think that we can do that between ourselves. So that's not open meeting. I can say, hey Rick, you have 2 and I have 2 that are the same. So which one do you want? Which one do I want? That we can do without the group.
Right. Just
And
don't
then
make it a chain where
No, and I
you
can
tell
just,
Rick, Rick tells Mike, Mike tells Matt.
no, but yeah. So and I can just tell you what we decided.
So I think the takeaway then is for each of us, specifically me, to go through and get you some information and have you update this sheet, and then come the December meeting. It looks like it's Julie, myself, Pat, Greg need to go through it, and then in the December meeting, we can kind of see what's left, and we can try and divvy up some of that other stuff. So, anything else on the park assignments? All right.
And staff will still try to prepare a tool that'll be effective for commissioners. We had talked about it at the last meeting, so
Perfect.
we'll still work on that.
Last thing for reports, recommendations, just quickly go through the work plan, kind of an update. Are there any updates to any of these since the last time we met? I get to lead off with number 1. No. Yeah, well, I do actually, number 1. There has not been any updates. I have not talked to the Human Rights Relation Commission. I think when we did our work planning for 2020, the question was out there that is, should this be shifted over to them? And then if they need a park property or some sort of park space for whatever they find to be an appropriate way to acknowledge and remember this family, then we would be happy to jump on board. So I think at this point, we might be able to close this one until 2020.
I would agree. I've also talked to Heidi Lee and just kind of indicated that we are waiting on the HRRC for a recommendation. And I think we even talked about it as if we did decide to close this one from the Parks Commission standpoint. Doesn't mean it would be closed with the HRRC.
Correct.
And a logical point then with this to just come back on your agenda for an action item. Because I think, like you had indicated, you're kind of just waiting on that to see moving it forward. So
Good. Anything else? Well, we're down to initiative 4, and I can update that one too. So the takeaway, we had a conversation, the work group here on the phone, and I was able to reach out to Troy Stein, who's the athletic director at the high school, to get an understanding of who would be the person responsible to him, or is it someone else, and then maybe try to put together a meeting so that we can more formalize what it is, the working agreement between the schools and the Park and Recreations Department in field usage. Because there is some handshake, there is some formal documentation. You think of Braemar and the ice and those types of things, but there's some handshake as well. But be able to formalize something so that we had a conversation that really, I think, it deals more with perception than what really is happening. And so that we could document that and then be able to communicate that to our boards that are coming to us and saying we're out of field space, when in reality they just don't want to use the field space that was assigned to them in some instances. So Troy was open to sitting down with the meeting. The person that he said that we should also include, and probably has more expertise, is a woman by the name of Julie Gabrielson. She's on the Edina Community Education Department. She does all of the field rentals and field assignments for Edina Public Schools. So the next step would be to meet with probably myself, Greg, Julie, Tiffany, Perry, you're welcome to come, and Julie Gabrielson, and then kind of really formalize a document that both the schools and then us would have. And if there's any opportunities that we can try and find a way to do some sort of trade or some way to be able to use each other's facilities.
that's actually good timing. We were actually meeting with Troy and his staff in December. We're kind of talking about a little bit of those handshakes starting to. We had an issue this year where the Edina Athletics was looking to use one of our parks to use natural grass fields. And we kind of went back and said, do we charge, don't we charge? We should be charging, we're not going to charge. Let's work this out in the future, because it was one of those, well, I don't think you had in the past. And it was kind of like, well, I don't think we've ever done this in the past. And, if you were an association, we would charge you, but this time we won't. Let's get together in December and talk about it. So you're right. There are a lot of those. As much as we've kind of formalized a lot of our agreements, there's still every once in a while we kind of find another one where we go, okay, let's get together. So
yeah, and the feedback from Troy, at least in the 15 minutes I talked to him, is that he as an athletic director is all for trying to find ways to make that a more formal. And he used the example of the field in front of Valley View. If you've been up there, it's an older turf field, and they're replacing the turf this summer. But he acknowledges the fact that when summer rolls around, there isn't really a lot of programming on there for the schools. The soccer teams and lacrosse teams use it in the fall and the spring, but then during the summertime when we're looking for field space. So he used that as his own example for a way that there would probably be some opportunity. And then also some of those field requests as they came in from the girls soccer team to use the Lewis. So, all right. Any other updates on the work plan for 2019?
Well, I provided some race and equity comments, so just want to make sure you got those, Perry.
I did, and I don't
And
know
then I
if-
don't know what our next steps are on that one. So.
Yeah, and I just didn't know if, Julie, if you,
I realized I worked on it, but I didn't send it to you.
Okay.
Because I think Greg said that I didn't have an immediate deadline, so I'd started working on it and then I stopped. But I can get those to you, like today. And hopefully then we can move that forward. And I missed the last meeting, but was there an update on where we're at on the other item that involves the Human Rights and Relations Commission on their
the engagement?
Yeah, because the ball was sort of in their court on that one too.
Mhm.
And that's another one that's just sort of sitting there to my knowledge, but I also recognize I missed the last meeting.
Yeah. So the first on the policy piece of it, if you could provide me those, and then I'll kind of maybe do one document with those recommendations and get that back out. I think I'll wait for your feedback, but since you've already done it, I think part of my initial thought is looking at it as a sense of kind of the feedback that Brenda, you gave was, should we look at more of, instead of individual agreements, one general agreement with our expectations, and then the appendix would be more unique per association, and kind of just maybe flip it around than it has in the past. So we have all the same expectations, and then this is soccer, this is baseball, this is et cetera. Kind of maybe take that approach with it, so it's universal. And then the other piece, so as soon as you get that to me, I can kind of get that back around. And the other piece on engagement is the HRRC will probably reach back out to you on that piece because they've developed some ideas on what engagement could look like. I think that was the piece of it, is their task is going to kind of look at is what's the skeleton of the process look like, is where could it be, how to reach out to groups, what should we ask once we get people there, and then re-engage too. So that's kind of that partnership piece. That one was one where we do have it carrying forward on the 2020 plan. So just the piece of that won't be a 2019 completion. Hopefully we can make some good progress on what it looks like, and then next year is actually doing it.
Okay, good. And then, Corin, I think I saw an email on the AARP designation today, but I didn't. I just kind of glanced at it, but it looks like you're right. It looks like they're extending that into next year, and then they're looking at a July date to do kind of the survey. So I don't know if you can help us with that as well, because
if you could forward that to me.
I will. And the last I had handed off to you was from our meeting last month, was that they had decided that it's going to basically take an extra staff member that we're going to have to hire to own this procedure. Kind of why I asked in terms of from the budgeting where we're going to have these people come from, because it would basically be a person just to evaluate us and do the audit of here's all the things we would want to do. Now do we want to do all of them to become an AARP, and what's the real advantage of being an AARP city?
So if you could forward me that
right
would
now.
be great. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I have just a comment about alternative funding. I had quite a lengthy meeting with a person, Jay Halverson's a resident of Edina. He's on the board and treasurer of the Minneapolis People for Parks. And in preparation for that, I looked at several of their annual reports and their Form 990s just to get a feeling of what they do. And we talked about, how they do funding, how they market. They have a relationship with the Park Board of Minneapolis. They have a foundation. So the foundation does big things, and these people kind of do the collateral. Their role as a fiscal agency, how they find board members, how they define their structure. So it was quite, I'm somewhat intrigued by what they do as a possibility. They've been doing it for 43 years. Very nice person. He's more than helpful to reconvene and give us some insight about how they do alternative funding. So that's all.
Any other updates? Okay.
I just want to clarify the other. So we've got the CIP information that I given you Mike, and then Pat I left you a voicemail on the advertising. Did you get that? I actually sent it to you. Okay. Okay. So you've got what you need from me for right now.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, we're on to chair and member comments. Anybody have any comments?
Sometime a couple weeks ago, October 14th or so, I had a chance to talk to a group of people at 7500 York. I was asked to speak there and talk about our parks, and it was quite good. Obviously we're governed by, I think, Section 8 of our bylaws about what we can talk about, and so I explained that to them early on. But just talked about, what type of parks we have, the minis and the communities and all that. And most of these people have lived in our community 30 or 40 years, and their knowledge is really pretty limited. And talked about our different master plans, certainly the bicycle one, what's happened at Arden, encouraged them to go down there and look, and it was neat. It was neat for them, I hope, and certainly for me to impart part of what we do as a commission board. So,
Anyone else?
I was just going to mention one thing. I saw a sign up, and I was just looking at our park list. I've seen it in several yards. It says Save Valley View Park, but that's not a park that is recognized on our list of parks. So I'm not sure what it actually means, and I did not go up to these people's door to ask them, but I have seen the sign in more than one place, and it was over by my house by Todd Park, so I wasn't sure. I just wanted to see if anybody knew what that may have been, and then if not, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that if there was something that we should be in a loop on, then maybe I might check it out. I've seen several signs. I don't know.
Purely speculating, but if you go on Valley View Road off of Tracy and you're going east, right by the fire department, there used to be a little triangle of land that for a long time, for about 4 or 5 years, they had a bunch of rose bushes in it. It's not a sellable, it's not owned, it's a private parcel. I don't know how to describe it. You can't sell it for property, and it does not have any sort of utilities on it. But if you're going around that curve on Valley View, there was a group of probably 7 or 8 people that planted a bunch of rose bushes, and for years they took care of them. I only know this because I drive by it almost every day. And then last summer, the chairs were gone, all of the tomato cages were gone, and they just went to wild. And then that was 2 years ago, and then this past summer they started taking them out, and now it's just been mowed back down, and not mowed, they take the bushes out and then they flatten the land and stuff like that. So I'm just curious to know if that might be it, and if someone just is creating a name of a park, calling it Valley View Park because there were chairs and it was kind of a community garden type of thing.
So I just Googled Save Valley View Park, and it does look like there's something in Bloomington that's a Valley View Park, and there's like a online petition to the Bloomington City Council and Mayor. So I wonder if it is, it'd be worth looking into more to confirm, but it looks like at least the Facebook that links to the Google thing is that it's a City of Bloomington issue.
And they have it up I've seen like 3 or 4 signs, like closer to, I live on the very north side of Edina, so interesting. So thanks for Google. So I guess I don't have any comments besides.
That would be the location where they're proposing the new community center in Bloomington. So, not sure.
Any other comments?
I'll let the director of Bloomington's Park and Recreation know that.
I just had one quick comment. Was up at Braemar, had a chance to go to the Dome once everything was done. I was really happy to see this year, as opposed to last year, the level of detail they did in preparation of the Dome opening. Last year, I had made the comments when it opened that it felt like they just put the Dome up and they didn't rake or pull all of the old leaves and some of the garbage and stuff like that. And it was nice to go in there and see that the Dome looked brand new and there wasn't leaf piles in the corners where people were walking and stuff like that. So I don't know how it went from a logistics standpoint. I know that there was probably some weather stuff with that weekend that was proposed to put it up, but my initial reaction was it looked really nice, and it was full that day. There's probably about 35 walkers, and both fields were using for soccer, so it was really nice.
we should have let Chad know. We did get delayed 1 week because of weather, but still met the deadline. So it just basically meant we had a tighter, more aggressive schedule. So I'll let Chad know.
Anything else? All right, staff comments. Perry, your floor.
I thought I'd maybe try a little bit different tack instead of me reading things to you, put it in your packet ahead of time. I also thought too, a little bit more exposure for the commission. I don't know how many people read your packets online versus just see that. So if people are perusing park board packets, they could kind of see. So if you like this format, kind of expect to see that. But just, going through the highlights, if you haven't been to Arden, I would strongly suggest to go by. The park kind of really started taking shape as far as the city work the last couple of weeks, with the rink being constructed, the buildings really coming along. The cabinetry went in today, so we're really pushing to kind of hit that we need to be open for the hockey and ice skating season piece of it. So that's really going on. We had the walk with the mayor in October. As indicated, the golf dome is up and running. We're having really good success with that. KSTP did a live feature on it. I don't know if you watched the clip or not. It wasn't the news broadcaster missed twice. So it was giving Joe a hard time. He didn't like live TV because he kind of had to do if you would have hit the ball, this is the arc you would have seen on the screen. So it was kind of enjoyable, but at 5:30 in the morning or whatever they did for the live spot, it wasn't much. As indicated by the chair, the sports dome is up and running. That was a little bit of a challenge. We had to postpone 1 week, which from a logistics perspective, getting the contractor, all the crews, all the staff lined up is a big piece. There's now more and more domes that are been constructed, so that it's kind of the chain reaction, right? If somebody misses a Saturday or a Sunday, how that gets all pushed around. So it really went well. I was very proud of the cooperative staff between the arena, the park staff. We had a lot of public works there as well. We're ready at Todd Park. That's the temporary rink that we do every year. That was transported and installed and set up. I'd like to say, and now we just wait for cold weather, but now we have cold weather. So I would imagine we'll have good ice again this year. So Centennial Lakes Park, the east side of the park, that was an approved capital improvement to replace that path with the concrete. That all got done yet in October. And if you haven't been to see the railings on the bridges and the lighting is all installed now. So that is kind of a piece that has really come together now with that site as well. Edinburgh Park had a not so scary Halloween party, really good attendance. It's interesting, every year they do it on the 30th, and every year on the 31st we get people that show up, and it's just kind of that, we don't have anything for you today. We were yesterday. So everything we've always done has been on, kind of a couple of days before. And then we had a kind of a weather barrier as well for Fred Richards. So it was interesting. We had a bunch of the neighborhood kids there. Really good interaction with the families that are coming there as well. Because of the weather, they would play till they got cold, and then we would let them cut the ribbon with the mayor, and then they would go home, and then the next group would play for a while, and then we'd get the ribbon back out, and we'd let them cut the ribbon again. So I don't know, Rick, I think we did it at least 4 times where we had 4 different grand openings of the site. So, but tough to predict that time of the year what the weather is going to cooperate with. So, and then just a comment, tomorrow I'll actually be giving a presentation on the park system to all of the realtors that do buying and selling transactions in Edina. So it's kind of a group effort. They have continuing education that they have to do. So every department in the city will be giving a presentation tomorrow to all the realtors, kind of telling them, basically selling Edina. With that, kind of to Commissioner Itis had indicated he had given a presentation. I'd be willing to share that with you. If there's things that you think we could add to it for the future, or if you say this would be a group where it would be great to go out and talk to, or if that's part of our future engagement. We had talked about kind of having a pre-canned set of information that we could share that's maybe fits kind of a universal audience. We could kind of capitalize on having that already done. So.
Great. Questions, comments? City Council updates?
Just a few. We actually went to the city council. They waived the building permit fees for the Fred Richards shelter. So I think we saved in the CIP fund another $1,800. So at this point, we'll take anything we can get. But working through that piece of it, and then the arena bought 2 water heaters, and it's just very interesting. They were able to capture the energy efficiency from what their prior ones were to what the future ones are, and it ended up coming out of that sustainability fund that Scott talked about tonight. So didn't come out of the CIP, didn't come out of the Arena Enterprise Fund. It came out of that sustainability piece because the efficiency is giving it a better payback. We were eligible. So it was a good way for staff to leverage different funding throughout the city. So pretty exciting, water heaters.
Questions, comments? That's all we had on the agenda. We needed a motion for adjournment. So moved. Second? All in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.